So, like to do a little Q&A. I think the sound is probably good enough that you can just. Is that okay with you if people just speak up, or you need them to have mics? Okay.
Over here.
Right
here.
Well, can we have a couple of people to volunteer to circulate the mics?
For the question.
Yeah. Anybody want to do the mics for whoever wants to ask questions? Thank you. It's on. One for the other side.
Pardon me?
So just raise your hand if you want to ask a question, and a mic person will come to you.
Hi. I was wondering, can the home gardener make their own biochar? And if so, what's the recipe?
Great. Yeah, there's.
Excuse me for one moment, please. There are seats for people who are sitting along the side here. If you could find some seats in the middle of the room, because some people are having trouble getting up and down the stairs. So if all of you who are sitting along the stairs, if you could find a seat, that would be really great. Thank you for your help.
Gotcha.
Oh, sure.
Gotcha.
Some seats in here.
Okay, question about home biochar. There's some really great ways to produce biochar in a backyard setting, from using barrels, metal barrels in what are called retorts. There's a lot of resources on the web. I've even seen a camp stove where you're using material that you bring, sticks and other organic materials, and so it heats up whatever if you're cooking while you're camping out, and then it produces biochar as a not waste element. So I'd say look online. There's some really great, easy backyard methods.
Hi, I have a question. I was wanting to ask Bruce about, have you checked for lead? I have concern about lead in the recycling of the leaves and stuff from the urban environment. And I compost at home, but I don't use my leaves for that reason. And I was wondering if that's a concern and limitation on what you can use your compost for.
Yes, we do test for lead, and we've looked at lead sources in inbound material in Boston and from other settings. We've also looked at the lead that's in wood chips and how much lead variation there is in the raw materials that come into the site. We've tested our finished product and know that we have lead that's in the mid-range. It's under the EPA and DEP thresholds of 400 and 300 parts per million in the finished product, respectively. We have seen materials that came into the site before we took it over where the lead levels were much higher than that. So we've seen a lot of contaminants come in with the raw material that comes into our site, painted lumber primarily, and street sweepings that used to come into the site that we believe are the most likely sources for the higher lead levels. Are you an urban resident?
Yes, in Quincy, Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm. And have they tested their soil or their compost that comes out of there?
I mean, I'm making my own.
You're making your own.
And I have trees in my yard, but I don't. I have trees in my yard, but I don't use them in my compost.
I would be surprised if they are very high in lead levels unless you're raking up painted soil that might have had paint chips in it, or you're close. The lead does not move. My understanding is the lead does not move very well into the trees themselves, into the tree leaves. It's the dust, the dirt, paint chips that get raked up and brought into it. So your leaves are likely to be fairly low in lead content if they're don't have a lot of dust and paint on them.
Okay, thank you.
But you can check. You can send samples off to the lab. Trust but verify.
What lab is available to use?
You can UMass, UConn, UNH, yeah.
So mine is an add-on question to that. Herbicides, pesticides, do you track them as they come in? And when you test your finished product, what are the results?
We have tested some of the material that comes in. We know that there's definitely herbicide residues in grass clippings and vines. Our biggest concern with the residues that might survive the composting process are a class called pyralids. Amino and chlorpyrrolid are ones that have caused problems in other composts. The best methods that exist now are bioassays, so testing the finished product to see if sensitive plants show results of the toxicity, because that's a type of herbicide that can survive the composting process. So we have not seen pyralid levels and plant injury in the finished products that we've tested in seedling growth trials. But we cannot afford to test everything that comes in, so it's more taking representative samples and then testing. So there's work that's being done within the composting industry to try and get those materials off the market. But unfortunately, some of them are still finding their way into the marketplace. Most other herbicides, the composting process is extremely effective at neutralizing most of the complex chemical chains.
I just have a comment following up on the biochar question. New England Biochar is a company here on the Cape, and I'm from the group called South Shore Sustainability, and our communities have worked very positively with that company, and there's a lot of videos available and helpful cooperative work with Bob Wells there. So I highly recommend that anybody who really wants to pursue this, give New England Biochar a call.
Bruce, if I may, I had one question relative to the cemetery soil. I've heard some news about green burial options because of contamination, I believe, from the embalming fluids and so on. And I'm just curious whether any of the soil from the cemetery you implied that it was generally clean. I'm wondering if any trace contaminants have shown up in that soil at all.
We have not seen it. We haven't used it in a while. But the excavations that are being done are on plots that were clean
Relatively
to begin with.
pristine.
Yeah, we probably the safer thing to do would be to test every batch of soil that we got from the cemetery to see if there were residual embalming fluids perking through. But we built 2 urban farms, Revision and Food Project Farm. And one of the problems that we did have when we started talking about this was from some of the Caribbean islanders who said, I don't care how clean that soil is, but you're not putting that juju on my, I'm not growing food in that. So it was more of a cultural than a chemical concern. And so, but due diligence and cost would go into a more thorough analysis of it. But in Boston, at the time that we did those large-scale projects where it was several thousand cubic yards, we had clean soil tests. But when we put it down, we didn't find any formalin, which would have been the material that would have shown up.
Okay. Someone else? I'll come up and back.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks. Question for Bruce on the organics ban. So if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, the state has banned large generators from putting organics into the landfills, but other forms of bureaucracy are keeping new facilities from being able to accept that. So I was just wondering if you could speak to how you're seeing the relationship between the amount that's being generated or that potentially could be generating and what we can actually properly compost and get out of the waste stream. How much of a bottleneck are we looking at right now to really be able to reap the benefits of the ban?
Yeah, good question. The State Department of Environmental Protection and some of its contracted service providers are helping to provide some technical assistance to facility operators or people who want to develop facilities. So there's a number of incentives where existing composting facilities are now allowed to take material. In our case, in Boston, we have a contract with the Public Works Department, which is concerned because of the history of a poorly managed facility. And I will be the first to say that a poorly managed food waste composting facility is a nightmare. And it's so site-specific who the operator is. Are they well enough capitalized? Do they have neighbors that they've pissed off before? So I think the regulatory framework makes it easier to develop composting facilities, to take the food waste, but those facilities are relatively few and far between where the skill set and the equipment match the need for that material to go. So if you have it lends itself to more centralized, well-capitalized facilities or smaller, decentralized facilities that are run by scrupulous and skilled operators. So we hope that there are some of both of those and work both with farm composters, with municipalities and private sector composting facilities and anaerobic people who are developing anaerobic digesters to take that food waste.
Is there close to enough capacity right now, or not even close, or not close?
There's, I'd say with more investment, there's enough facilities, but the equipment and the skill set to match the operating capacity of those facilities is what I'm most concerned about. Yeah.
This is a question for Jono. John, I'm over here.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry. Is there I know we have efforts and programs and interest in solar farms, putting them on various sites. Is there any kind of organized efforts or programs or approaches to keylining, pasturing, appropriate lands in, I'm suburban, I'm not urban, so this is more of a suburban question. Is there a way of acquiring land or convincing people to use available open space rather than subdivisions to use it for this purpose and then put a few houses around the edge of it? Is there anything organized in that area?
Interesting. Yeah, great question. It sounds like, if I'm getting your question right, the idea that there's open space land and there's development pressure on the land, and how can there be other uses, agricultural uses. The land trust movement is really strong in this area, where there's small local land trusts that work within several towns. There's statewide land trusts, such as the trustees of reservations, who often work with communities, community groups to help buy that land. Sometimes they'll pull out a few parcels to develop, to help with the cost of it. There's a great project near me in the western part of the state, Northampton, Massachusetts, where a local community group paired up with the municipality. They fundraised to buy a very large bottomland floodplain farm that was going to be developed, probably residential development, and did a very innovative approach where some of it are playing fields, soccer fields and such, and some of it's a large farm, some of it's a community garden, and there's a whole riparian productive conservation area as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for that, and it really takes some innovative thinking. The financing is really difficult, as you can imagine, and but there's ways to work with that, and organizations, I would say, check with your local land trust.
Why don't we switch microphones? So, the gentleman over here.
Should we not encourage individual homeowners to practice in place non-compost heap mechanisms by means of which just cutting the lawn longer and having and mulching lawn and leaves in place so that it forms a thatch. It precludes the need for fertilizers, and lawn then becomes very verdant. It seems to me that education has to be a very important part of this process. And in reference to the initial speaker, we are, and I mentioned this here in our small group, we are forgetting that 75% of the surface of this planet is water. And we're not addressing that in terms of the 3,000 square mile island of plastic junk in the middle of the Pacific. These are significant concepts that we cannot overlook when we talk about sustainability of the planet.
So we'll go from side to side, Carl.
Okay.
One of the things that you were discussing, I can't remember which person now, of using the heat of the compost in the greenhouse. And one of my concerns, and I've seen it happen, is that ammonia is generated many times and it can kill plants very easily. So how do you avoid that particular problem?
Having killed many plants with ammonia, thousands. I make sure that the exhaust gas from the compost is scrubbed through the soil, and that the soil traps the ammonia gas and converts it into ammonium and then nitrate in the soil itself. So it's fairly simple once you know how dangerous it is to dump ammonia in. So, and I've worked with a number of clients that wiped out their own plants with ammonia. So I have a healthy regard for that gas. But misplaced, but properly directed, it can be very useful. We call it fertigation. So it's aerosol fertilizer that's going into the soil underneath the plants.
I was just going to follow up just to kudos to Bruce, who was involved with the New Alchemy Institute in the 80s, and really that the New Alchemy Institute and those innovative ecological designers are really the shoulders that we stand on for a lot of these things. There's some, and just to add on to that, there's really exciting kind of next generation development with some of the greenhouse ideas and the work in bioshelters right now. We've been working with several different landowners and building these sort of integrated systems as bioshelters. So some of the visionary work done all those decades ago is really happening.
I'd like to add to that we have one of the people who is I don't know, are you the second generation New Alchemist? Yeah, he'll be speaking next after our break, but he's intimately involved in those kinds of restoration activities. That's Jim Laurie there. I wanted to just comment on something that Bruce said about the proper management of the ammonia, or to add to it, the cattle, or whatever it is that we're doing. And you can take something and make it toxic and deadly, or you can take it and make it a regenerative source of magnificent beauty. And that's the carbon story. If it's in the wrong place, too much of it, we don't want all of it out of the atmosphere, because if you think this is cold, but needs to be the right measure in the right place. And so carbon up there right now is lethal, and in the ground it is amazing. And that's the task, is to do it right.
A question for Bruce. Is it cost effective to implement something like bioaccumulation to remove toxins from the compost, or use compost in sort of a manner to distill water or harvest water in such a way?
Let me, is it cost effective? It always comes down to scale. What is it that you're trying to, so the bioaccumulation of toxins, what toxins? What are they in the soil? Are they, if you could provide me with some more detail, I could tell you probably not cost effective on a lot of scales, but it depends on what the chemistry is that you're trying to address.
I understand that there's a number of mushroom varieties that can remove pesticides or heavy metals or even metabolize them. So there's mushrooms that could do it too. Or like, I'm not sure for the
right.
particulars, I suppose.
Yeah, I know that in our composting work that we have taken soils that are contaminated with the petroleum products, and the bacteria love petroleum, and they can modify hydrocarbons into something very useful that you can test for in the final product, and it's not there. Lead is much harder to deal with, and in compost itself, lead is still there. So you have to have some way to either dilute it and bind it up so it doesn't release. But if you're actually trying to strip it out, most people in the industry will tell you if it's in there, it's going to stay in if it's a heavy metal. But some of the other things, composting is used to break down a wide variety of contaminated materials and does so very well. So they use it for cleaning up explosives, dynamite, massive quantities of dynamite, compost very nicely. So if you've got dynamite, we can help you out. But the mushrooms, John, you might have some more.
Jim can talk.
Yeah.
I'm going to say a little bit about mushrooms later, so say something about that.
I just wanted to say something about the words you used, cost effective. And I think to put all of what we're dealing with in an economic context is, given who we are and how we operate, it's important. But one question I ask is, you talk about businesses and triple bottom line and all that stuff. Say, how much business do you think you can do on a dead planet? And from there, you say, okay, well, maybe the top priority, whether we make money out of it or not, and I'm not opposed to people making money out of doing good work, we need to not have a dead planet. I mean, that's the bottom line if you want to talk about bottom line. So whether it's cost effective in this accounting or not, we've got to find a context where the accounting works.
Just a quick follow-up on that, but what's really exciting is that a lot of the work that needs to happen, a lot of the niches that need to get filled aren't even imagined yet. There is a lot of work to be done, and so, especially for you all who are out there who are trying to figure out what should I get into, what area should I work in, this is a huge time of opportunity. It's a time of crisis, but also there's a lot of opportunity there too.
Okay, we'll have one more question.
This just is a question about who is regionally mapping the potentials and constraints related to these particular concerns.
That's all right. Anybody in the audience have an answer to that? You're welcome. I mean, we're these experts, and you're those experts, and everybody, we all know. Sure.
I just went to
microphone.
Well, as far as food policy goes, the Kendall Foundation just came out with a, what is it called? 60 by 50. So they're regionally mapping all of New England's way to get food 50% by 2060. That's the vision. And they have 3 scenarios in this. You can read it online. There's an executive summary. So that, does look at the New England as a region for food. And with that, you'll find probably a lot of regenerative work that you've been talking about.
Right. That's the New England Food Vision. Yeah, it's a great document, and
John Carroll, who was at our Tufts conference, also, he's a professor at UNH. He also has a book on, I can't forget the title offhand. Can't remember the title offhand.
He's
But
trying to figure out how much land in New England could be grazing land. And it turns out it could be a huge amount. Grazing could be a lot easier than plowing rocks and things.
his book is available free online, so it's Carroll with 2 R's and 2 L's, Carroll, and I'll get the title of it and tell you later. So we're finished with our Q&A for now. Thank you all very much. And
quick announcement?
yeah, sure. But I was just going to tell about Nancy, the next piece. Go ahead.
Just one second. I just happened to get a note saying it was Greg Watson's birthday, since we're talking about New Alchemy. Greg used to be the executive director of New Alchemy, and today he's the Commissioner of Agricultural Resources here in Massachusetts. Former agricultural commissioner. Okay, thank you.